coffee break with me. Come and take your coffee break with me. Come and take your coffee. Come and take your coffee. Come and take your coffee break with me.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Coffee Break with Candace and David. I'm your co-host, David Marino, and today we are speaking with local comedian, comedy writer, and self-described gluten enthusiast, Valerie Nies. She's written for a number of sites, and her sketches have been featured on Jezebel, The Huffington Post, and many more. She's also a published poet. Her debut chapbook, Imaginary Frenemies, is out now. Without further ado, Valerie Nies, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, David. It's really good to be here.
So I had a chance to watch all of your stand-up clips on your website, and I was cracking up. So first of all, I wanted to ask you about your work as a comedian. How did you end up getting into comedy? What was sort of the inspiration behind that?
So I moved to Austin in 2005, and around 2008 or 2009, I decided to go to an open mic and try stand-up comedy for the first time, only because my friends told me that I was funny. And so I thought that I would give it a shot, and I totally sucked. I bummed, I was not good at it, and I didn't really know how to get better. And so I just sort of embarrassed myself and didn't really do it again for a while. Instead, I took some improv classes and sketch writing classes through Merlin Works and the Institution Theater, respectively. And I really loved sketch writing. And Tom Booker was my teacher, and he was a great sketch teacher. And then around so I was still doing comedy, but around 2013, I decided to try stand-up, and I took a class. And so I did something where, like, I didn't just quit because I sucked. I decided to try to get better from people who knew how to do it better than I did. And that's when I really started going to a lot more open mics. And that's when I started doing it more seriously. And yeah, I feel like writing both stand-up and sketch comedy and other types of comedy like satire, scripts, that's really where I feel at home, is writing.
For you, when did the light bulb go off that, okay, I can do this, I can actually kind of be myself on stage and kind of embrace your brand of humor? I feel like I probably thought that in 2008 or 2009. I just didn't really know how to craft a joke.
And I think what helped me was collaborating with people. And that's what I wasn't doing when I first started out. So like taking a class or finding some friends that you trust and running jokes past them helped me. It also helped me to have teachers who pointed out, like, oh, you're very funny when you talk about this, which is what Tom Booker did. He's really good at helping people. He used to own the Institution Theater in Austin, and he's really good at helping people recognize what they're naturally good at. So I think having somebody affirm that is much more beneficial than just going to open mics where there might not be an audience there who wants to affirm anything. If there is an audience, they might be studying or on a date, and they're not necessarily there to see comedy. So I think open mics are super duper important. It can just take longer to figure out what's working and what isn't, if that's the only thing that you're doing.
Are there any comedians for you that you've watched over the years that have kind of been an inspiration, or that you sort of not really patterned yourself after, but really just kind of were like idols for you?
Yeah, I mean, I love Maria Bamford. I love Tig Notaro. I can see like really good stuff in most comedians, even if they're not like my particular cup of tea. I love watching what they're trying to do. It's hard for me to pick one. I think the very first comedian that I ever liked when I was a kid growing up was George Carlin. I thought he was very intellectual and interesting. Yeah, I could talk about comedians all day long. I like, different comedians for different reasons. I think people like Pete Holmes are very, he's a comedian who can talk about things. Like, I feel like I'm very dark, and I sort of talk about, like, I have an acerbic style, and he's very cheery, but it's still cynical, or can be cynical. He's like an optimistic cynic. And so I look up to him for that.
And I definitely feel like for most of us, like humor and, watching funny things or watching a comedian, it is definitely a form of escape. And in the last couple of years, I think we've all needed some kind of escape because it's been really tough out there. And as somebody that writes, especially, are you able to draw inspiration on some of the negative and able to turn that into something, I don't want to say positive, but funny? Because I think that's where humor comes from a lot of time. It's sort of like the crappy things that happen in our lives. Sometimes when you take a step back, there is humor in it, maybe not at that moment, but later down the road.
Oh, absolutely. It's very cathartic to find ironies or hyperboles, or, in the tragedies that we experience. And I would say that almost all of my comedy, the funniest stuff, is the stuff that, like, is, when I'm the angriest about something or the saddest about something. Maybe not that day, even though sometimes it could be that day, especially if it's like an annoying thing that happened that I'm angry about. But, I turned a breakup into a one-woman show. And that was great for me. I think it was great for the audience. Everybody's gone through a breakup that sucked really badly. So I would say that most of my comedy is probably based around something that was, I don't know if unfortunate is the word, but, something that wasn't, if everybody were happy, like, there just wouldn't be comedy at all, but that doesn't mean that, like, I'm unhappy, or that my comedy has to feel, or that comedy has to feel unhappy. I think it's just like a coping mechanism, sort of.
The only thing sadder than eating a healthy choice frozen meal is buying them. Nothing quite says, I'm single, like pushing a cart down an aisle of Super Target filled with healthy choice frozen meals. By the way, they pair really well with a tub of cat litter and Biore strips. I'm just like trying not to look any customers in the eye for fear that they see the family-size bag of Twix in my cart too and realize, hey, it doesn't look like she probably has a family. She's gonna eat that whole bag herself.
And how has humor helped you in your own life?
I can't really turn off how I think. And I think that, in spite of, I think a lot of probably performers feel this way, like, oh, cool. I like when something unfortunate happens, it's like, oh, this is going to be material for something, though. Nora Ephron, who was a screenwriter, she wrote When Harry Met Sally and a lot of other things. She also wrote some great essays and books. And one of the things that I think her mother said to her, which then she talks about in an essay, is that everything is copy. And so she turned her divorce from one of the guys who wrote about Watergate, I can't remember if she was married to Bob Woodward or Carl Bernstein. She turned that into a book that then was turned into a screenplay. And, so absolutely, I think it's helpful, even if it just ends up being a tweet. Like, I haven't written a screenplay, but I pretty much tweet about everything that's going on in my life, the negative stuff anyway. So, I hope that answers your question too. It definitely helps. I find that, like, thinking the way that I think entertains me. And that's kind of all that matters, is like, okay, am I being entertained? Great. This is how I'm getting through life. I'm going to entertain myself around this.
In terms of other people, like, curious about getting into comedy or wanting to write for comedy, you actually do have some workshops that you've taught. What would your advice be to somebody who is trying to get into specifically stand-up? Because there is a lot of work that goes into it. It's not like you just walk on stage and, it's effortless. Although it looks effortless, from me watching it, I just think, oh, they're just talking about their life. It's so conversational that I never think that it's written.
And that's, I think, the trick is to make it sound like it's the first time it's probably ever come from that person's mouth. And and that's a sign that you're watching good comedians. So I can only speak what has helped me in my experience. And I think I think I think a lot of people want to try stand up, and a lot of people have a dream of like commanding a stage and holding an audience, captive with their comedy. And the thing to do is to get out there and do it, and to write jokes. What I have found beneficial in my life is to look at how people who are doing what I want to do have done what they're doing. And so I'll read about how they're doing what they're doing. And one thing that helped me was to get back in it. Like, I knew that I could go do open mics. I had done them in 2008 and 2009. And, I bombed, but I didn't always bomb, or else I would have never done it ever again, probably. But a class was offered at the Institution Theater, and I thought, that'll give me accountability. That's what I really need to produce, is a writer's group, or to put some skin in the game by spending a little bit of money on a class. That really helps me. So that helped me because I got direct feedback, that I was asking for feedback and I got direct feedback. And so it just made me feel confident about what I was talking about, or helped me to retool something. And then I went out and did open mics. And if you get out and you're a nice person and you do open mics, and you, in my experience, let yourself be known, let people who are running shows know that you want to do a show, record yourself, practice and get better. And if you're telling the same joke and nobody laughs 10 times, maybe there's something else that you could do with the joke. Those things have helped me. So after I had been doing stand-up for a while, I took over the class that I had taken at the Institution Theater. That was in 2017. And I switched up the class a little bit because I have taken so many writing workshops. I emphasized the writing component of it. And I've taught that class even through the pandemic. We transitioned it online until the institution closed during the pandemic. Tom Booker moved to Nashville, and the building was sold to another place. And so after that, I continued teaching them, and I am still teaching workshops online independently. And people can find out about that at a website called ethercomedy.com. But yeah, I think for me, what helps is meeting people who are interested in doing what I want to do. And that happens at classes. And it can be stand-up if there's a stand-up class offered, but also improv, sketch comedy. All of those people, most of them, at least in the Austin comedy scene, dabble in all areas. And those classes are super helpful to performing stand-up too. They can be.
I have to ask, because I always think it's hilarious, like the breakup type stories from comedians. I always find those funny, or anything really personal like that. Do you ever worry about the person that you're writing about seeing it? Because I think those are the most hilarious things. Like, when you are talking about those, especially breakups, to me, it's really funny to hear somebody else talk about it, because like you said earlier, it's something that everybody can relate to. And they've had those feelings of, whatever, disdain maybe for that other person. But do you ever worry, not just with that specific subject, but how do you kind of reconcile, like if you're talking about family or something like that, does that come into the equation? I'm always curious about that, because I would imagine that maybe after the show, you might hear from some people, but how does that go for you?
I think that's a great question too. So sometimes when I talk about people on stage or in my poetry, I will let them know that I've written about them, or that I've written something that was inspired by them. A lot of times a joke doesn't, it's not a biography, but it's based in truth. There's some element of it is truthful. I've asked people's permission when I've been dating them, like, hey, I want to tell this joke. How do you feel about it? And I've never gotten anybody to say, like, that makes me feel uncomfortable. I guess regarding breakups, like, sorry, but that's what happens when you date a creator. Like, I don't really care at that point, unless,
I love that.
Like, if the person didn't care about my feelings, why should I care about, they can tune out. I mean, that said, I don't want to be like, mean for the sake of being mean or anything, because that doesn't necessarily funny anyway. So that's why it's good to get feedback and run stuff past people. Like, do I seem too bitter right now? Is this funny? That's the ultimate thing. Is this worth talking about if it's funny? If it's just a rant without being funny, I don't want to talk about it.
What kind of feedback have you gotten from, some of your students that have taken your classes, and what are they looking for specifically? Because I know everybody approaches writing differently. They approach comedy differently. And I know that you say it has to be about that person and how they take that lesson and sort of apply it to their style. But what are some of the things that you find to be the common thread with people who are trying to do some of what you've done?
I've heard more often, or I've heard more than one time, multiple times, like, how do I get to Cap City? What's the shortcut to and I mean, I haven't broken in, I have this little comfortable world that I've created where I get to create comedy. So I'm not the best person to ask that question, but I don't think there are shortcuts. I think it's all about hard work and putting in the time. I think people want to know, is what I'm writing about funny? And so that I can definitely help with, because most people are engaging. Most people can talk about what they love and what they hate, and it's engaging. And it doesn't need to be comedy necessarily. I mean, sometimes we laugh because it's just like conversation. So, and there's already comedy can be sort of mathematical. There are already a set of different techniques that comedians use to turn something into a joke. And so what I get to do is listen to people talk about what bothers them or what's going on in their life. And then I get to say, hey, here are some tools. This is how this comedian told this joke. Can you apply that to your material? Here's what I think would help. And, people can take or leave my feedback. It's not do what I say. It's just, these are my ideas. And I think I'm really good at helping people because I've had really good teachers discover what it is in their life that's funny, and to help support them, basically.
What's the comedy world like here in Austin? In terms of just the pool of comedians, what have you found to be the case in this area?
So post-pandemic, I haven't been going to open mics. I did a few Zoom shows because I used to host a show at the Institution Theater that I loved. That was it was really important to me. It was called Smile More. It was consistently sold out. It was a all women's showcase and female identifying showcase. But so in my time, pre-2020 doing comedy in Austin, this city has such a rich community of comedians who are all pretty supportive. It's a very easy place to get stage time. So, we've got multiple theaters, and there's not what I've heard happens in some other cities, rivalries or just unfriendliness between theaters. That is not something that happens in Austin. And there's so many, coffee shops and bars that also give comedians opportunities to perform. So I think Austin attracts cool people, or has in the past. And so there's a lot of cool people doing comedy. There's just, it's gotten to be much more diverse than it was when I started.
And you talked about doing improv earlier, which I do feel like a lot of people that do improv, that is sort of a very helpful thing for being on stage and just being able to go with it, especially if things don't really work out the way you want them to necessarily. Have you found that to be the case, having been in improv?
Yes, I've taken improv through Merlin Works and through Cold Town, very far apart, different styles of improv. And I performed improv with the troupe for a while. I'm not the best improviser, but it was so fun to, first of all, just be in community with other comedians and to recognize what kind of improviser I am. I'm like a straight person who can point out the premise and the game. And so that has helped me to be a better writer for sure. I think what you're talking about, the ability to go with the flow, definitely improv is a good practice for that. But also just being on stage and trying to I love improv as something that can teach you about life, and I think that's why so many people who aren't necessarily comedians go and try it. Just like anything that can help you to be more adaptable and flexible and less precious in life is going to help you on stage, whether you're doing comedy or anything else. And I also want to plug Merlin Works too, because I'm teaching in-person classes there starting on October 20th. And I'm really excited about that because I haven't taught an in-person stand-up performance-based class since the world shut down. So that'll be good and exciting. And those classes are different. The one that I teach is more about writing. This will be the in-person performance-based class that helps people develop material for the stage. The writing one also helps, but being on stage, stand-up has a lot of components. There's writing, there's performing, there's directing, there's maybe acting involved. So.
Well, let's talk about your book, Imaginary Frenemies. I love the title, by the way, but can you tell me about it, or even first off, describe it. You can even read an excerpt from it if you want to as well.
Oh, I would love to read. I have so many poems to read. So I'll just tell you a little bit about how this started. So as you mentioned, I've written comedy, and in March of 2020, obviously I didn't feel funny. Nobody felt funny. I loved writing poetry when I was in college, and I was going to go get an MFA in poetry, and I didn't because it seemed like a very expensive, like nice to have kind of decadent thing to try. So I didn't go to graduate school to do that. But then all of a sudden the world, stops, and I don't feel funny. And I have a lot more time on my hands. I was somebody who was just busy and overscheduled before that. And so I was listening to a podcast, and not about poetry or comedy, but the person on the podcast was a published poet, and she was teaching a workshop in April of 2020. So I took her workshop just thinking I was going to kill 4 weeks of time with that. And that led to me finding out about more workshops and meeting these different poets from that community. And I just started writing a lot of poetry from basically April 2020 until the present. I'm still doing a lot of writing. And I took basically 2 longer courses, which led to the development of this book, it's called a chapbook. A chapbook is anything that's under 50 pages of poetry, I believe. Maybe it's 40. Don't quote me. And then I also wrote a full-length book, which will be coming out in 2022. So I was writing poetry every day, and I wrote a lot, and I was looking for themes in my work, and I had a lot of poems that I had written from the perspectives of different inanimate objects and like celebrities. And I write a lot about adolescence, or there was a big chunk of my poetry that was about adolescence. And I think part of this is because we weren't able to go do new things during the pandemic, but creators get to write about what's already happened. And so, I took a chunk of my poems that were essentially about growing up and the kinds of things that we think are our friends. I think so much of growing up or so much of being a human being is trying to find your place in the world and trying to find acceptance, and not really sometimes getting confused about what that might be. And much of my writing too, or much of my growth personally, has been how do I be a better friend to myself? So Imaginary Frenemies is a collection of poems that sort of touch on this idea of what is friendship. The things that we think are our friends might not be. Things that are horrible occurrences or situations might actually be something that really benefits us. Speaking of breakups, for example. And so this book is there's poems from advice from Bette Midler. Eddie Vedder makes an appearance. Mark Maron, the host of WTF, makes an appearance. There's a poem from my training bra in here. So that's a little bit about what this book is about.
Is there a part that you want to read, or is there a poem specifically that you'd like to read, or?
Okay, I will read one from Bette Midler. Well, she didn't write this. Okay. This poem is called Bette Midler Dispenses Stray Advice During a Playground Game of Red Rover. Hold tight, Bet says, prancing behind me and the girl whose hand folds into mine. The game is to prevent the other team's players from breaking through our fence of 6-year-old arms, but I'm cursed with the weakness of a wavy, wacky, inflatable tube man. A third kid cracks through my barrier, a pattern. Every time this happens, the opposing team snatches one of our strong kids, and I'm met with sneers from the recess oligarchy, future 1%ers and corrupt dictators, I imagine. Bet says, well, you're good at other things. I want to ask what, but this seems audacious. And after all, I'm from the Midwest. Bet is audacious with a capital A. As an actor, she assumes we always want to hear about ourselves because she says, you're good at making people laugh, which sounds like a key shifting into place the first time you unlock the door of a new apartment decorated in promises. Nothing is more satisfying, and I can say that because, honey, I've had an album go triple platinum. The other team sends more rovers to my weak arm. Our team depletes. Just me and the girl whose hand folds into mine. Hold tight. You're in it together, Bet says. I know it's hard, but trust is more important than running fast on playgrounds or even winning a Tony. In the future, you'll actually excel at grasping too hard. For instance, the girl whose hand you're holding is named Betsy. She'll become your bestie until her dad's job relocates their family to a Denver suburb. You'll be crushed until 3rd grade. That betrayal will squat in your nervous system and only clear after a deep session of EMDR in your 30s. Fascinating, but irrelevant. What I really want to know is the best way to find approval on competitive playgrounds. Bet says, people love Vegas, but I personally despise it. I was turned down for Sister Act, and that's okay. Wasn't meant for me. Instead, I got to wear polka dots and play 2 versions of myself in big business. Even better. What else should I know? Big oil is trash. Recycling isn't real, she says. Put your efforts into composting. Leave your hometown. Oh, and always call yourself divine.
Yay, that was great. I love Bette Midler, by the way.
Oh, yeah, me too, obviously. Yeah.
If people are interested in finding your book or even taking your classes, how can they find that information?
They can visit my website, which is Valerie Nies, Nies.com or ethercomedy.com. But they can get to Ether Comedy from myname.com.
I was just checking Instagram before I got on stage, and someone took a picture of sushi, so that's what I'm craving. But I only want the kind that is blurry and poorly lit. I don't want to burst your bubble, but kale isn't actually healthy unless you talk about eating it. Scientists have discovered a strong correlation between telling someone you've eaten kale and boosts in metabolism.